Welcome to the Retirement Answer podcast. I'm Dan Goldie, your host. I'm the author of the upcoming book, The Retirement Answer. And this is the podcast where we answer all of your difficult financial questions and simplify financial information. I'm here with Monie in his ADU, and Monie's going to be very excited with this episode because this is a current events episode, and it's right down your alley. This is we're going to talk about artificial intelligence as it relates to personal finance. And the reason we're going to do that is there was a Wall Street Journal article about 2 weeks ago. We're recording this in like the third week of March. So it's a couple of weeks ago, this article came out, and I thought of you immediately because we talk a lot about using AI in just everyday life. And you mentioned that you use it a lot in your job as a software engineer. How do you use it?
Yeah, I mean, this is right in my wheelhouse. I love AI. It's been fantastic for the software industry so far. People are, of course, worried about job displacement. That's a different discussion. But in terms of the technology, it's fantastic. It's been great in augmenting software engineers. But first, let's start with like kind of defining what we're talking about when we say AI, right? Because AI can mean a lot of things to different people, but in the context of this discussion today, I think we're talking about AI in terms of the large language models that everyone gets exposed to. So ChatGPT, Gemini, Claude being the most common ones that everybody uses. And so those chatbots basically that help you out. So when we're talking about using AI, we're talking about going to ChatGPT or going to Gemini or going to Claude or any one of these engines that you want to use and actually typing in and asking questions with respect to finance and financial advice. As far as it goes in the software industry, it's fantastic. It works great, but you have to have domain knowledge. And I think the same thing exists, and we'll get into this, but I think the same thing is going to need to exist in the financial industry.
So let me just ask you, for the viewer, what is domain knowledge when you say that?
So domain knowledge means understanding the context of what it is you're asking and understanding what the answer coming back means.
So you need to have some expertise.
Right.
So that you can properly prompt the AI and you can evaluate the answer.
That's right. That you can assess what's coming back. I mean, for example, I am not a doctor. I know nothing about physiology or very little about physiology. And I may ask a question about health that AI provides. And AI could completely make up an answer for me. Right? Because at the end of the day, the thing is a statistics engine. It's not conscious. It's not a human being.
Well, that was going to be my next question. How does an AI actually work?
It's like a big, humongous statistics engine. I mean, without getting too esoteric about it, I mean, you could think about AI as it's fed all of this data. It's fed data that we've produced, writing, literature, anything online, statistics. It's that data is then correlated into these models. People have heard of ChatGPT 5.4, ChatGPT 5.2. We're talking about the model, the underlying brain that's used to answer the questions. And you pop in a question. The question at the end of the day is turned into a bunch of numbers that is then interpreted by the machine. And the machine
predicts the next number in the sequence.
What am I going to predict in the sequence? Mm-hmm. Exactly. So yes, it is contextual in that it looks at the previous numbers before it gives you the next ones. Sure. But again, it's not human. So it's prone to error because it's only going to be as good as the data you fed it. So there's that. But there's also this thing about hallucination, which is it can just make up answers. And it's very good at making up answers.
And it will answer with authority.
Well,
it's exactly, that doesn't understand that it's
exactly.
doing that.
And it's so good at manipulating you into thinking that it's like the world's greatest expert in whatever it is you're asking it, because at the end of the day, it's trained by human data. So it knows how to manipulate you very well, right? So the way it answers questions and the way it interacts with you makes you trust it. So you have to be very careful and conscious about the fact that when you're asking advice as if you would be asking a professional, say a financial professional or somebody with an expertise in some domain, you have to take the answers that come back with a grain of salt. In other words, they should be validated and verified with someone who understands the context of the answer. For example, if I were to tell Dan or anyone who hasn't architected software to go and build a system that can handle 1 million transactions a second, and they go and just type that into the AI, and the AI spits out all this stuff and says, oh, I can build this, this, and this, and this. There's no way for Dan to validate and verify whether that's an actual process that's going to, or that's an actual bit of software that's going to work in the context of the question that was asked. It's going to spit out stuff at you, but you don't know how accurate it is. And the same thing exists for financials.
I wouldn't be able to, in that situation, I wouldn't be able to evaluate the quality of that answer and whether it's correct or not, or maybe it's partially right, partially wrong. How wrong is it? I don't know.
Right. So it's very good at augmenting a professional. So software engineers, for example, you get really good software engineer that really understands software. Then the software engineer can talk to it, iterate with it, model using it, and really save a whole lot of time in their daily tasks and routines. And they can understand the context of the information that comes back.
And actually, you've mentioned to me previously that you've used AI and it's 10x'd your production speed, but you know what you're doing and you're asking it the proper question and you're evaluating the answer. And, that's a situation where it's augmenting your existing knowledge and making you more efficient and a faster worker.
Tenfold, like you said. It's almost amazing how much more efficient you can be as a software engineer when you do all this stuff, because it takes care of all the mundane tasks that you don't want to do and allows you to iterate through your ideas very quickly, until you get to a point where, okay, this is what I want. But it's an iterative process. It's a long process, and it's a process that requires you to understand what it is you're asking and understand the reply.
Well, I have a question related to this, nothing to do with finance, is in that situation, is it necessary for, let's say, upcoming engineers who are developing their careers, do they even need to know how to code, or do they need to know how to code to evaluate the advice and have it augmented by the AI?
Well, yes, I'll say yes and no. Okay, so when we say, do you need to know how to code, we're saying, do you actually need to know how to write computer software? Writing software allows you to start understanding the internals of how operating systems work, how machines actually function. And then there are a whole host of paradigms that you use that are kind of what I call language agnostic. So it doesn't matter what software language you use, but the paradigm is the same, right? It may be modeled differently in, say, Java versus C++, but the paradigm is the same. You have to understand those baseline things. And without understanding how to code, because you haven't been exposed to that, at least one language or a couple of languages, if you don't have that, then you're not going to understand the context of what comes back. If you have done it for 15 years or 10 years and you have had some experience coding, then you understand the context of what comes back. There's so much esoteric stuff with software engineering, right? But it's the same across. It doesn't matter whether you're using like one language or another. They may be idiomatically a little bit different. There may be some nuances with one language versus another, but what you're trying to achieve with the operating system is the same. And so the principles, the underlying principles are the same. And so the way you ask the question would be the same. So you got to understand the context, basically, is what I'm saying. And we haven't gotten to a point where somebody can't know how to code or hasn't been exposed to enough information, domain knowledge is what I call it, to be able to use it in a productive way, to put out, production quality products.
Interesting. Okay, so let's jump to...
Let's do it.
What I was going to talk about next, which is how many people are actually using AI. These are, investors, people or potential retirees. How many of them are using AI to get financial advice? There's some statistics that I'd like to share with you.
Sure.
There have been some surveys done. So let me just quote quote one of them here. J.D. Power did a survey where they found that 51% of consumers now turn to AI for financial advice or information. So that's roughly half of all Americans are using AI to make financial decisions to some degree. And another 27% in this survey, another 27% of folks say they haven't used AI yet for financial decisions, but they're considering it. So if all of those people, in a year or so, are using AI to make financial decisions, that's 3 out of 4 people that are doing that. And
that's a little scary.
That's a lot of folks. I had no idea. I work in the industry every day still, and I had no idea that large a number, probably of my clients, are actually using. At least half of them are probably using AI to some degree. I knew that some of them were, but I didn't know it would be such a high number that half of them might be using some kind of AI engine to get either definitional information or perhaps, I don't know, checking advice that they're getting. Or
well, you threw out a number when we were talking about this. You found a number that kind of interested me quite a bit. The error rate.
Oh yes, so that was a different study. So let's go into that. Let me find it here. Okay, so I don't know who this was that did this, but researchers, someone who was researching AI, asked ChatGPT 100 personal finance questions and found that roughly a third of them were wrong. The answers were wrong. So that's a 33% error rate. That might be okay for some questions because they're not that important. But when you're talking about your financial information and making financial decisions, can you imagine that a third of the answers are wrong? And so you're acting on advice that is completely made up possibly, or just incorrect or old information.
Right. And that's exactly what I was saying, is that you have to have domain knowledge when you ask these questions, because how do you know as a layperson, say, I know very little about the financial industry, and so I need to talk to a professional or read your book to learn things. And I go and start asking it for financial advice. How do I know the financial advice it's spitting out at me is actually valid? I don't, because I have no basis on which to. And that's exactly the point I was trying to make with the software, is you have to understand that you have to have domain knowledge for this stuff. It is not right now we don't have what a lot of people in the AI industry call the singularity or general intelligence. This stuff is at best giving you average advice, at best, right? So you take it with a grain of salt. It's very good to ask it to teach you. You can ask it to teach you stuff that's objective, definitions for things, formulas, understanding the basis for okay, like I was telling Dan the other day, I had, when I was first learning how to trade stock, it was very hard for me to kind of learn the vernacular. Nowadays, you can just go and on ChatGPT and say, hey, teach me about how do financial markets work, right? How do I what is a derivative? You can ask it very static questions like that, and it can answer you and provide you really good
definitional information.
Information. Not so good when it comes to qualitative information, especially with regards to your finance.
And it's not personalized.
And it's not personalized.
It's impersonal. It's by definition average.
Right. And how many people, Dan, I remember you mentioning there was a percentage, I think, from Credit Karma, was it, that did the study? What was the number there?
Yeah, I have it right here. It's Credit Karma did a study, and they found that 52%, let's say half of Americans who acted on AI-generated advice, later learned that the advice was wrong. And it doesn't say, what kind of damage was done or anything like that, but, half of people getting bad advice, that's a large number.
Right. Remember what I said about iterating on the software side? You can't really iterate when it comes to your personal finances, right? It's one thing to say, I asked ChatGPT to model some numbers for me, and we iterated through various scenarios. And then I had my financial professional validate those assumptions and what we did. It's a whole nother thing for you to go act on it, because once you act on it, there's no going back. And I think that 52% learned the hard way.
They acted.
Yeah, they learned the hard way that is not the case. And by the way, Dan and I were talking about this before the show, and it just reminded me as we were talking about it. You have to sandbox yourself. Be very careful. And when I say sandbox, we use this terminology in the software industry to talk about security boundaries. You want to create a security boundary between your personal information and what you're putting on these bots. I know it feels really good and really comfortable when you're talking to them. It feels like you're talking to a friend or a family member. It's not your friend or your family member. It's a computer, and you're typing into a web form, basically, right?
And that information is being stored, and it's being used to develop itself. And
you don't know where that information is going. So you give it your social security number, you give it your salary, you're giving it your address, you're giving it your personal information about your family members.
Well, and what about giving? What about giving your not just that information, but let's say someone says, "Well, no, I know enough not to give them my social security number." But what about giving them your financial information? Meaning an AI. When I say them, I mean an AI, giving it information about your investment values and what you own in your portfolio.
I would say estimate. Don't provide exact information. Estimate. Again, this thing, we were talking about this just before the show. There's no, can you tell people a little bit about fiduciary duty and the fact and what you guys sign up for as financial advisors versus the fact that ChatGPT has none?
One of the things that I think that advisors like me, independent fiduciary-based advisors, have done to the industry is we've forced Wall Street and other parts of our industry to become fiduciaries for their clients. It's been a competitive issue that because they used to just give, they had a different kind of advice. I'm trying to think of the word, like qualification. They didn't have to be fiduciaries. They just had to give advice that was suitable. They called it a suitability requirement. That was what brokers did 30 and 40 years ago. That was all they had to do, was satisfy this suitability requirement. Whereas those of us in the investment advisory industry, we were always forced to be fiduciaries. And so now things have changed, and now pretty much everyone is a fiduciary. And what that means is that you're acting in the best interest of your client. You're putting your client's interests first ahead of your own. And that's how I think of that term.
And guess what? ChatGPT doesn't have a fiduciary duty to you. Neither do any of the other models that you use. Those are giving you very generic advice. And if you go read up on the use terms on those, like the legal terms, it'll tell you very specifically they have no duty to provide you the right information. Right? They're doing the best they can. It's not that there's a malicious intent to give you wrong information, but what it spits out is what it spits out.
And they don't have a legal issue there. That like advisors have,
they have a duty.
Well, there's a regulatory body.
Yeah,
we're all part of different regulatory bodies, and we can be severely punished. We can lose our license if we do bad things to people. So, we're held accountable, I guess is what I'm saying. Whereas the AI is not.
Right. Yeah, I mean that's the point I want to hit home, is that when you have a professional, a human, looking at the advice that's been given you, there's someone who's taking responsibility for the advice that they're giving you. Because we're talking about your finances here. This is pretty important stuff. Your retirement, your bank account, by the way, do not provide, I'm going to say this one more time, because I just keep hearing stories about people doing dumb things, like using these agentic, for those of you who don't know, forget about what I'm saying because it's not going to make a whole lot of difference. But there are people now using these agentic agents, which are basically like your ChatGPTs, but that do things for you, to go do financial stuff for them, read their emails. Very dangerous, right? Do not give these things access to your personal information, your emails, your passwords, your bank accounts. You have no idea how they can be manipulated and misused. So it is not the time right now for that kind of thing. Generic information, fantastic. Ask away all you want. Teach, ask away all you want. Ask it to model things for you, all you want. Do not act on advice from an LLM with regards to your finances right now until you have a professional, someone who knows what they're doing to validate that advice. That's my number one.
And you want to, of
Advice
course, you want to, of course, evaluate the quality of the advisor you're using.
For sure.
And everyone needs to do that, of course.
Yeah.
So here's a story that we were talking about before the show that came up, where apparently someone didn't vet their advisor very well because this advisor's
the Naples, Florida thing.
Yeah. Apparently this advisor in Naples, Florida, first of all, he took the personal information from his client, and fed it to an AI, an LLM. And so that's a big no-no right there. Like, an advisor should know. You can't take personal information and share it with anybody. The personal information from your client is sacred. That has to be, locked away in a vault somewhere. That's not shared. But apparently he did share that with an AI. And then the AI gave the answer of what should be done. Apparently he asked the AI what the advice for advice for this client. The advice came back and he acted on the advice. And the advice was, liquidate all of your holdings and put everything in one stock. So apparently the AI thought this one company was great. It could have been Microsoft, for example. That we know that happens quite a bit because the AI is not unbiased.
That's right.
And Microsoft put a lot of money into OpenAI, so it might recommend Microsoft stock. But anyway, it did this, and the advisor settled out of court. Apparently, he was sued by the client appropriately for not only sharing personal information, but giving terrible advice to sell everything and put it in one company.
Wow. I mean, that's insane, right? You get a professional that uses...
And you mentioned something about lawyers doing that, like where a lawyer that you heard about, and maybe you read about it.
Yeah, I mean, for those of you who don't know, like the entire law profession is based on something called stare decisis, which means let the decision stand, right? So how do lawyers work? They go and research previous cases and look at what the judge said in those previous cases. And if that decision was okay, they use that as the basis for making an argument for their case. So the entire legal profession is basically a lot of research. Well, this lawyer decided he was going to take a shortcut and start typing it into ChatGPT, and ChatGPT started to make up cases that fit his argument. And not only did it make up cases, but it made them up so well that it added like numbers and all the identifying information to them. And the genius lawyer goes and uses this and gets caught doing this. So for those of you who are professionals out there, do not try to take shortcuts right now. These things hallucinate. We call these hallucinations when it makes stuff up. It does that for software all the time. It makes stuff up all the time. So you got to be really, really careful. The latest, I've noticed the latest models are pretty good, at least with the software stuff. It's nowhere near as bad as it was.
Well, I was going to ask you, is this going to evolve? And
it's
you think it'll get a lot
change.
better?
Sure, as they learn. But the key here is that these models are so complex, without getting too deep into how this stuff works. So they work. You can imagine that there are these neural nets. So there are these little neurons like they're in your brain, right? And they're all connected to each other. And there's an infinite, almost as far as we're concerned, number of combinations of how these things are connected and intertwined. And, you feed it all this information, it learns this information. It's almost impossible to predict why it comes up with a certain answer. Right? So it's a very complex system, and it's prone to hallucination. And even the best researchers in the world don't necessarily understand exactly how it goes from it takes a question that you type in and it comes up with a certain answer. So be careful when you're using it. Do exactly what I said. Sandbox yourself. Do not provide personal information or personally identifiable information, what we call PII in the computer security industry. And then same time, make sure you take any of the advice it gives you, actionable advice it gives you, over to a professional like Dan and say, hey, is this actually valid?
Well, a good use of AI, I would say, and I think you would agree with this. I mean, you're doing it already in your job, and advisors are starting to do this as well. Is you use it to augment what you know, and you use it to make yourself more efficient.
Sure.
And here's a study, a Northwestern Mutual study, where it said that half of Americans, 47% of Americans, say that they would prefer to work with an advisor who does just this. They're using AI to assist in what they're doing. Perhaps they think the advice will be superior if it's augmented by an artificial intelligence situation. So that's probably, for now anyway, until the AIs get better, that's probably the best use of them, is used by a professional, assisting the professional.
Agreed.
Think of it like you would never, as a person that is not a medical person, you would never use WebMD for medical information. You might use it to get some definitions and give yourself a structure to go to your doctor and say, okay, what do you think about this, this, and this? Similar.
That totally makes sense to me. Get yourself educated so you can talk to a professional about this stuff with some context.
Well, I think what people need to learn is that there's a difference between using AI as a starting point and using AI as 100% gospel that this is what I'm going to do, and then following through on that. You're going to, at least the way where we are right now with AI, it may get better in the future, but you're setting yourself up for potential harm there.
I think that's the key. I think you hit the nail right on the head right there with exactly what you said. That sums up the entire episode right there, right? The people are, so again, end of every episode is always going to give everybody what my takeaway is as the audience proxy. It's AI is out there. It's prevalent. It's easy to use. It lowers the barrier to entry for anyone to ask financial questions. And by all means, go and use it to educate yourself. Go and use it to do some financial modeling if you want. Be very careful about the information that you're providing it. Make sure it's not personal information, personally identifiable, because you don't know where that data is going. And on top of that, as Dan was just saying, make sure that you get the advice that it's giving you, the actionable advice it's giving you, to be vetted by a financial professional. Make sure that you get it signed off on by somebody who knows what they're talking about, because they owe you a fiduciary duty, whereas this little chat engine that you're playing with owes you nothing, right? And there's no oversight on what it's providing you, the information it's providing you. So do not take action without validating and verifying that action is, in fact, the right thing to do.
Yeah, that's good advice. And, well, I mean, I enjoyed talking about this with you. This was great to get your feedback on something that I don't know as much about as you do. And so let's look forward to next week. So next week, we're going to jump back into the book, and we're going to cover chapter 3 in the book, which is the last chapter we did in the book was chapter 2, Social Security. So now we're jumping into the other big federally sponsored benefit program for retirees, and that's Medicare. And Medicare is an alphabet soup of, it's very confusing. So we'll do our best to summarize everything regarding Medicare and help you understand what it's all about and how it came together the way that it did over many decades.
That one.
So that one's next week.
I'm looking forward to that one because that one's an interesting one. It was a eye opener for me the complexity of it was an eye opener for me. I had no idea Medicare was so complicated until I read your book.
Well, we'll dive into it. And thank you. And we'll see you next week.